Hi, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. For those of you who don't know my name yet, I'm Athar Hussein Khan. I'm the Secretary General of the European Business Aviation Association, EBAA. We represent more than 700 business aviation companies in Europe and beyond, including aircraft operators, FBOs, manufacturers, service providers, and others in the industry. I'm delighted to welcome you to our second virtual roundtable organized by EBAA's Associate Member Advisory Council, AMAC for short. AMAC advises the EBAA Board of Governors on areas of interest to the membership and acts as a bridge between EBAA and our associate members. Consisting of several committees and each serving individual sectors, AMAC is also an incubator for projects that have a real added value for the wider business aviation community. While many of you today joined last week's roundtable on rethinking relationships in business aviation, I wanted just to take a few minutes to recap shortly what was discussed last week. During the first part of the roundtable, we focused on rethinking charter brokering. Private aircraft charter operators and brokers need to be fully transparent with customers about the terms and conditions for flights to avoid any misunderstandings that could undermine consumer confidence in the market. Adam Twiddle, co-chair of EBAA's AMAC Charter Brokers Committee, highlighted his concerns about the perception that new charter customers might have if contract terms aren't clear, and also about how some flights are being advertised in the market today. Now, EBAA's AMAC Charter Broker Committee also worked with the Air Charter Association to jointly publish a document called Guidelines and Recommendations for Charter Flight Contracting. And as EBAA, we strongly urge our member companies to adopt these guidelines to ensure consistency. Committee co-chair Marc Ryan explained that it hadn't been easy to get operators and brokers to agree which terms and conditions should go into those EBAA guidelines, which makes it more imperative indeed to adopt these in the market. He also acknowledged that sometimes customers are not fully aware that terms and conditions offered by a charter broker could be different from those of the operator providing the flight itself, and that this has the potential to spark legal disputes. In the second part of the webinar last week, we discussed rethinking sales and acquisitions in the industry. Aircraft brokers addressed the challenges of completing transactions in the wake of the ongoing COVID disruptions. Janine Iannarelli, chair of AMAC's Sales and Acquisitions Committee, described how she has been using Zoom recently to provide clients with virtual walkarounds of aircraft. For now, demand is stronger for small and medium-sized aircraft than it is for the longer-range jets, because owners face such uncertainty as to where they can fly safely and legally today. Valerio Zamboni, founder of Monaco-based broker NewJet International, also told participants that travel restrictions are affecting the European market. Customers are choosing to buy and sell aircraft in their own country and territory to avoid any cross-border complications. Now, in the last, but certainly not least part of our discussions last week, we debated rethinking aircraft finance for business aviation. Marie-Laure Gassier, chair of the AMAC Financiers Committee, called for the creation of a single aircraft registry for the whole of the European Union. She said that this would improve safety by ensuring greater consistency and also make transactions more straightforward. I would like to thank our speakers and experts once again for their valuable insights provided last week. Now, as business aviation emerges from the COVID crisis, it is the right time to pause and reflect on the future challenges and opportunities for the industry. Today, we'll be digging into the future of business aviation regulation, and I look forward to another dynamic and insightful discussion with the participants and the panelists who've joined us for this webinar today. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the entire EBAA team, as well as the AMAC chairs and committee members, for organizing these 3 webinar series. Without further ado, I'll hand over to your host for today, my colleague Paul Walsh, who's EBAA's Senior Member Services Manager and also EBAA's Senior Point of Contact for AMAC. Thank you all very much. Looking forward to a great afternoon. Paul, over to you.
Thank you very much, Athar. So, I know what you're all thinking. You're thinking that you can just have this webinar on in the background while you do a bit of work or talk to your colleagues, answer some emails, and I'm here to tell you that that's not the way it's supposed to be. This is an interactive brainstorming session at scale. We have a comment section, we have a question and answer function. If you want to actually participate live in the discussion, you can put up your hand and I'll try and include you. And I don't care if you challenge us, if you criticize us, if you even insult us. The main thing is that you don't ignore us. The issues that we're talking about today are too important. They concern the profitability of your companies. They concern the future of your companies. They concern the safety of your employees. Today we are rethinking regulations, rethinking maintenance, and rethinking ground handling. And so just to get the interaction off to a good start, I'd like to begin with a poll. So if we could just get the poll on the screen. The vast majority of us have gotten used to working from home over the past couple of months. Are you more productive working from home, working in the office, or do you try to avoid work no matter where you are? That last comment was suggested by my boss, which might say something about his expectations for our membership or his own work ethics, but I don't get too much into that. So while that poll is running, I would like to introduce our first speakers. Now, taking either of these ladies on in an argument is tough, but taking the 2 of these lawyers on at the same time is like taking your life into your own hands. So it's with some trepidation that I'd like to introduce Giulia Mauri and Frederique Joss, co-chairs of the AMAC Lawyers Subcommittee and partners at Quadrant Law Firm. Giulia, Frederique, welcome.
Thank you very much, Paul.
So, Giulia, I'd like to start with you if that's okay, because I get conflicting input from members. There are some members that tell me that the regulatory regime is fine, that they've got good relationships with their authority, no real problem at all. But then there are other members who tell me that they are being regulated out of existence, that it's completely disproportionate, that we need to do something about it. Can you give me some input on this? What is the right answer? I could put the question in a different way. Should our members be trying to adapt to regulations, or should we be trying to adapt the regulations to our members? What do you think, Giulia?
Well, thank you very much, Paul. First of all, it's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon. And your question goes straight to the core of our business at the moment. First of all, I think it is very difficult for somebody active in business aviation to give an overall answer to your question. What is business aviation? Who are the people and companies who work in business aviation? Well, if you think about it, it is such a mix of different companies that for me, it's almost impossible to give one answer. You've got commercial and non-commercial operators. You've got small and medium-sized companies, sometimes even very small companies. You've got aero clubs. You've got large multinationals with AOC in different countries. So who are the authorities regulating? For whom is EBAA speaking when it speaks on behalf of business aviation? So it is a very, very tricky question. Secondly, what is the situation with regulation at the moment? Well, it is true that the regulatory framework has become more and more complex in the past years. So I'm not sure that the issue is proportionality. For me, what I see in our business, the issue is complexity. The regulations regulating business aviation are becoming more and more complex. And of course, this requires a large investment of human resources, of training into ensuring compliance. But this is not an issue which is peculiar to business aviation or to the aviation sector. In my many years of practice, I've seen the regulatory framework for other industries evolving in the same way. Let's think about the insurers. Insurance, at the beginning of the year 80s, 90s, they were almost non-regulated, and now they're heavily regulated. And this, of course, puts small and medium-sized companies under a huge struggle, because what small and medium-sized companies have to do now is to distract resources from their core business, so business development, running, you know, aircraft and offering good services to their client, and move them to compliance. And this is a real problem. So for me, more than an issue of proportionality is a real issue of complexity. But then I'm very curious to know what the other panelists think about this.
Well, what you're saying is complexity that we essentially need to learn to live with.
Well, certain complexity, yes. Others, when you say that something is non-proportionate, you have to identify what. So it's very difficult to say in broad terms that the regulations are non-proportionate. For example, the EASA basic regulation, it's a framework regulation, which has then been implemented through specific implementing regulations. And I've seen the evolution of EASA, which moved from a purely prescriptive type of regulation to performance-based regulations. So EASA has introduced in its type of in its way of regulating the industry some flexibility, which I have to tell you, it's pretty unique in a way of regulating an industry. So there is space from flexibility. Whether or not that flexibility is sufficient, for me, it is a judgment that is linked to the type of company which has to apply that regulation. Are those regulations fit for small companies, for aero clubs? Do we need to differentiate based on the size of the companies?
Very good, Giulia. And I think that performance-based regulation is a very interesting aspect. I think we should consider as well whether it's performance-based in name only or whether this is actually the reality. But I'm going to move on to Frederique essentially with the same question. Do our members need to adapt, or do we need to adapt the regulations to our members?
Hello, good afternoon. Obviously, I totally agree with what Giulia just said, that there's a higher and more in all regulation, not only applicable to business aviation, of complexity. And you have on European level, not only hard regulation, I would say, but also guidelines and a recommendation, which is making it even more complex. And because we know that, that's why I want to praise again the work of an organization like EBAA, because it's important that our sector of activity is taken into consideration at the very beginning of the law processing procedure. And I know the European Affairs and all the Secretariat of EBAA is doing a brilliant job by getting feedback from the members, from the stakeholders in all our sectors, and to advocate the position of the stakeholders in order to influence the policymakers to take into account, because it's difficult to business aviation is not always taken into account. We are a niche in the aviation sector, and we always complain that the rules are not adapted to us, but proportionate, I don't know, but really adapted, because we have a specific activity, and if it's the message I would have again today, because I'm a bit active in the advocacy committee of BA, that we the members of the business aviation sector should always say what are the needs, how the regulation can be adapted to them. So it's taken into account from the very beginning of the law processing process.
Absolutely, Frederique. So there's no point in complaining if we're not willing to be actually part of the process of trying to shape those regulations. I absolutely agree. Thank you much, Frederique. Now I'm going to just bring in another speaker now. Joel Henks is CEO of AeroX. Joel, if you're online, I think I'm being quite broad in my questioning so far. I'm going to see if we can make it a little bit more specific. I was wondering if you could highlight one aspect of a regulation, whether it's an implementing act or a delegated act, that really is just not proportionate, that really we should focus on and try and change. Do you have an example, Joe?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Anyhow, this is not so answer directly to your question because the list is long. So first of all, the first thing I would say, a lot of things that we are asking for as an industry already since a couple of years or even a decade, I would say, just to name flight and duty time, adapted flight and duty time limitation, fractional ownership, and so on. I could go on and on, but looking at the actual regulation, we still see, beside the uniform application of the regulation, which is still a major issue, I can name at least two, I would say directly, which the one is when regards to training, because it's still not well understood that we train a little bit differently. So we don't have our own sim centers. We work with service providers, and this is we outsource mostly of our training. We don't have often not the smaller companies don't have the capacity and the competence in-house. And I think not everyone we can get the competence in-house. I think that's a major difference in a lot of regulation, that we just don't have the competence in-house because we're rather small. It's not like the large airlines. I want to highlight another one which comes directly to my mind, which is generally the personal requirements for an AOC structure or even an NCC structure. But on the AOC structure, we always face the same problem when it comes to the crew training managers. The requirement on a guidance material, so it should rather be flexible. But the problem is in Europe, the flexibility depends from one country to another, and in some countries from one inspector to another inspector, which gives us the requirement having a type-rated instructor on one of the type and class or classes operated by the operator, which is quite always difficult because most of the training, and luckily, is done in simulator with professionalists and competent training. A last point that I will highlight is some of the new regulation that had been introduced due to COVID, postponed by 6 months, if I recall well, is the support program. So after the German accident, we saw that there was a huge task force coming up with a couple of new requirements. So that support program in CAT-Gen MPA 215, and especially also the psychological assessment now required for every pilot, which, you know, those rules are done for airlines and they are really not proportionate for us. The list could go on, but I want also, another point is often it's the implementation that adds complexity, because our operators don't have the knowledge, the time to really go deeply into the regulation, and they await or they have the expectation that their inspector will help them. But what we see is a knowledge of inspectors very varied across Europe, across the EASA countries, and definitely not always helping the operators. And once the regulation is enforced, the problem starts. We see that actually with maintenance check flights, we see that transitioning to Part Carmo, EFB, and I could just name and go on.
I think this is a big part of it. And Giulia spoke about complexity, which is important. But now we're looking at complexity in the implementation of regulation. I want to know, Giulia, is this a type of complexity that we need to live with? Or should we be working on more standardization across Europe?
Well, I'm all in favor of standardization and harmonization. And it is what Joel is saying is absolutely true. And we see it on a day-to-day basis. On top of the complexity that I was mentioning before, operators are confronted in their day-to-day life, in their business, which is by definition an international business, to the implementation of these rules at national level. I'm going to give you an example, which for me is the biggest problem that I am facing with my clients, which is the definition of what is commercial and what is not commercial. So as you know, the regulations only contain a definition of what is a commercial flight. And these definitions are based on international regulations, such as the Chicago Convention And they say that, you know, at the moment you start transporting passengers or cargo for remuneration or hire, you are in the framework of a commercial operation and you need an AOC. Now, what is remuneration? What is, you know, when can you say that you are not doing commercial transport? And each country, because there is no overarching European definition or guidelines actually on this point, each country has got its own approach. So to give you an example, in certain countries, the civil aviation authorities accept that you can have a fractional ownership system based on shares in a company. The company owns the plane, you've got different shareholders, that is considered as fractional ownership, therefore private flights. In other countries, this is not accepted. The fractional owners have to have a ownership on a part of the plane. So it is very difficult, even for us as consultants, external consultants, to give a clear, straightforward answer and say what you're doing is definitely non-commercial. Because we all know that even in private operations, there is always an element of remuneration. So to give you an example, which speaks a lot about this complexity and different interpretation, a few years ago, I think in the Netherlands, somebody flew a very famous actor on its jet. There was no remuneration involved, it was clearly a private flight. But then they posted the picture of this famous VIP in front of the jet. Well, the Civil Aviation Authority considered that that was remuneration because it was publicity. So it had a real value attached to it. So it is very tricky, and for me, that is a real issue. I don't know what the others think, but this for me is the biggest problem in business aviation.
It seems that when we have these conversations about regulation, it never takes that long before we're into this Pandora's box of commercial and non-commercial. And I see that Alex Berry has an absolute beast of a question. That's what I get for asking people to challenge us. I'm going to come to that now in a sec, but I just don't want to forget about our poll as well. So maybe we just get the results of our poll. Giulia, you better working from home or working in the office?
In the office for sure. At home, I've got the 2 kids and a dog and a husband.
Yeah, that sounds great. And for me, I've really appreciated the opportunity to spend more time with my family, but I don't know if the feeling is mutual. So we have working from home 53%, working in the office 42%, and 3 people try to avoid work. So yeah, I think that's fairly representative. I'd imagine as well that it's pretty hard to run an airline if you're working from home, but I'm not even sure about that. So that's our first poll. Now back to commercial, non-commercial. On the face of it, I think most people have an intuitive understanding of what is commercial and what is non-commercial. Joel, why is it so difficult to get this defined in a regulation that's adequate for our sector?
I would not say that it's quite easy. We tried that already since long time to come up with a good definition.
Okay, but let me interrupt there. For remuneration, you pay for something or you get something in return, like a publicity benefit and so on. Not for remuneration, you don't pay for it, you don't get anything in return.
Yeah, it's not always like that. So if someone takes someone on the plane and will have dinner with him just as thank you, would that be a remuneration or not in the sense of the regulation? We should always look at it from a safety perspective point of view, because this is defined in safety regulation. So we have a clear definition what is commercial air transport, but then it goes below and things are really getting difficult. And I think that's one, as already mentioned by my colleagues, is one of the major problems we have, because every country sees it different, because we don't have a clear definition when commercial starts. We know when NCC has been introduced, the idea was to base that on the Annex 6 Part 2, especially Section 3, which states if like corporate aviation or flown by a professional pilot, etc. But here we are absolutely left out with, I would even not say a gray area, but basically a not defined area. And that's why coming into that gray area, or when we call it illegal charter or whatever we called it, you know, the line is very thin. If there is a pilot that just wants to collect hours and takes someone with him, if it's clear and the person that has been the passenger knows what the risk inherent with this operation would be, that would not be the problem. But we miss up a clear definition saying, and there was a good example giving with the Netherlands, seeing that as a marketing thing. I think here, and I know EBA is working very hard on this, we need to get this clear that it is always also adapted to our new business models. Or fractional ownership is around since more than 15 years, but we don't still in Europe don't regulate it clearly.
Yeah. It's a gray area, which sounds like we're going in the direction of asking for more regulation rather than less. And now I want to bring up Alex Berry's question, because this goes to the heart of something that really frustrates our members. So commercial or non-commercial, but has the EBA been rigorous enough in supporting prosecution of members who openly break the law and or flout the rules? I want to add another question to that. To follow on from what you've been saying, Joël and Giulia, is the vagueness with respect to commercial and non-commercial one of the reasons why it's so difficult to push for prosecution of people operating illegal flights? Or what is actually preventing us from trying to get some successes there? Joël?
Yeah, if I may up, the first thing is the regulation is a lion without teeth. So it's basically a safety regulation, and prosecution that Giulia can correct me, or is still on national level, which makes that very difficult. So we have two different regulations, one on the European side, prosecution is on the national side. And again, the regulation is really a lion without teeth. So it's not only that it's not clear, that's the first root cause, but it's also that it's very difficult to apply due to the still 32 different jurisdictions that we have here. But please, Giulia, add from the legal side what you might can add.
Giulia or Fred, please come in on that.
Yes, if I may, yes, the question is very interesting, and this is the old debate that EBAA has had and that we have in this industry, you know, how you fight against illegal flight. But now I want to be a bit provocative, and I'm going to tell you what is an illegal flight. Let's imagine that you are in a framework of fractional ownership. All the different owners fly on the same aircraft, but so it happens that there is an interchange agreement. And actually, if I'm owner A, I can fly on the aircraft that was reserved, or the aircraft that is in the same fleet. It's another aircraft owned by somebody else, and I do pay a consideration. Is that legal?
Yeah.
That's my question. Is that legal? I don't know. I don't have the answer. I know that it is tolerated. I know that it is done, but would you put a legal opinion saying that is legal? The aviation authorities will not challenge that? Not sure. So it's very difficult to tackle illegal flights. There are people who do those in bad faith. They know that they are doing illegal flights. But there are people who are actually doing an illegal flight without knowing it, because the regulation is so complex that you might end up entangled in the definition and cross-definition and not knowing it. So for me, that is the big danger. I don't even know what the percentages are of illegal flights. I think it is very difficult to calculate and estimate over all the flights that take place in Europe, the percentage of illegal flights. So for me, it is a very difficult topic.
Okay, thanks very much. I see that Charles Alcock also has an entirely different Pandora's box. Speaking about breaking the law, it seems that the UK are content to do this in a very limited and specific way. I'm not sure exactly what the terms were. With respect to Brexit, can the UK CAA be trusted in light of Johnson's administration's willingness to break an already agreed law? Do we need to just go on from that? Joël, what do you think?
You know, without going too deeply into this, we don't know that we don't know what happened. We all know it will be very difficult for some service provider that we have over there, let's just say for training, etc. That's services that has been used for years and years. This leaves a huge uncertainty. We know already that we have limited training and simulator access capacity. I think, yeah, license issue. you know, trust it or not, in these days, I just believe what I see on hard paper. And the problem is we cannot plan. And I think that's mostly the problem a lot of our operators face. We just have uncertainty with COVID, with training planning, those extension. When are we going back in simulator training? What I think is not good that we see is that people going back to train on the airplane, which we all know has some, yeah, from the safety perspective is quite critical. So that's what worries me as much, but absolutely uncertain what will happen. I think it will hit our sector, definitely the Brexit in one way or the other, but we still have 31 other member states left. So let's go on.
Sad but true. Thank you, Charles, for that question. And I think that Brexit is a separate webinar in itself as well. So I'm going to just move on from that. We have another poll on proportionality and regulation. So Justine, if we could just get that poll up as well. While that poll is coming up, Frederique, are there any regulations in the pipeline that our members need to be aware of?
Well, I wouldn't mention one regulation in particular, but trends in regulation. And as far as I'm concerned, I see two really big trends. First one, we all heard about it, is sustainability. We know that environment sustainability is a cornerstone of the European institution for the next 5 years. And we can expect an increasing pressure from the European institution on the business aviation sector, like on all the aviation industry. And there will be regulation, recommendation, and text that will be adopted in the upcoming month, year, that will impact our business. So it's more being aware of them, and again, participate in the advocacy role of EBAA. I think, and I can promote the event you're organizing next week on sustainability. I think it's a summit. The other trend is cybersecurity. In the last months, years, there is a digital transformation of businesses, and it has been accelerated with the COVID-19 crisis. And the more we are, obviously it leads to benefits, but also risk. The more we are becoming digital, the more we are vulnerable. And we are all faced in the last years, months, cyber attacks and cyber frauds in our industry. And of course, this has led a trend of awareness of lawmakers. And over the last couple of years, there are a couple of pieces of legislation. It's really a European patchwork on cybersecurity. And I know that EBAA will, in a few weeks, disclose some guidelines and information on that, on this European patchwork. And well, one of the most I would say famous piece of legislation is GDPR, which implied some cybersecurity obligation, but there are also the NIS directive that has been transposed in most of the country now, and the aviation security regulation. And this will impose some requirements to business aviation stakeholders, like not only to business aviation stakeholders, but like in all the economy, requirement to improve and to the security of their information system. So what needs to be done, really, it's to tackle this issue on a top management level, and to do a gap analysis to assess where you are in a business in terms of your cyber, the security of your system, where you want to go, what is your risk, to have a risk-based approach, how to reduce your risk or to accept it, and obviously insure it. So you need to talk to your insurer to identify this risk, talk obviously to your lawyer to also mitigate your legal risk, and to your IT provider. So I think really more than one regulation in particular, there is these two trends that will impact our business in the upcoming years.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Frederique. I want to see if I can just bring up the poll again so that I can read it out. Is that possible? Okay. There we go. We have the results already. The regulatory framework for business aviation in Europe is completely disproportionate and threatens the sustainability of the industry. 53% agree with that. It's fair, balanced, and proportionate. 11% agree with that. It's satisfactory overall and just needs a few tweaks here and there. 36% on that. So I think with that, Paul, I'm going to move on from our very interesting regulations discussion. Thank you, Giulia. Thank you, Frederique. And thank you, Joel, for your contributions. Thank you for the questions as well. This means that we are now on time, just about, and moving on to business aviation maintenance. And I'm very happy that a number of professionals have been willing to put down their tools for a couple of minutes to speak to us on this topic. We have Arjen Groeneveld from Duncan Aviation. He is chair of the AMAC and the GAMA Maintenance Committee. David van den Langenberg from Lux Aviation. Iwana Kowalska, also from Lux Aviation, and Kyle Martin from GAMA. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the call. I'm going to start with Arjen, because I know, Arjen, that you've done a lot of work essentially bringing people in the maintenance community together to try and identify key issues that you want to overcome. So I was wondering if you could tell me a bit about that, what your motivation was, and maybe what successes that you've had so far. Hi, Arjen, how are you doing?
Thank you, Paul. Thanks. Good question. So over the years, I learned when I organized annual events with CAMO departments of operators. And these were CAMO departments from different countries. So we had people from Spain and Scandinavia countries, England, Germany, etc. The interesting part was, first of all, to bring a group together, to build a kind of family feeling and to get to know each other better. But what became more clear to me is that one of the questions, what keeps you basically really busy in your day-to-day business is also that there were harmonization issues in between the European countries. So in one word, we have then a Part M, EASA Part M rulemaking, which is on one hand pretty open and gives you room for flexibility. But on the other hand, you have then regional inspectors, they have their own interpretations. So I saw in a certain moment the potential actually to harmonize, for harmonization, building a communication bridge with EASA, and actually having one focal point for the business aviation industry with its specific challenges. Compared to commercial aviation, in the business aviation, we deal with a lot of different make and models, which could be a little bit more challenging for the technical departments. Yeah.
Thanks, Arjen. I'm going to bring on David van den Langenberg as well. We've already been talking about the application of regulation at national level. Is this the big issue in maintenance as well? And I was wondering if you could think of an example of a regulation that is applied in a way that simply doesn't make sense. What do you think, David?
Good afternoon, Paul. Thank you. Well, a very fine example is an experience we had recently in our organization. You need to know we have multiple operations in a total of 9 EASA-based countries, and we had a transfer of an aircraft from one EASA country, actually where they also had the aircraft is a European product with a European type certificate and production approval, was always operated by an EASA-approved operator. So you would think that this would be a very easy transfer. The reality actually is today, if you look at all the countries we have across Europe, depending which regulator, of course, which national authority, it can take between 1 week up to 6 weeks, the work you need to do to transfer an aircraft. Now, I do understand if the aircraft comes from outside of an EASA environment and there might be some additional work, you need to have an export CFA and stuff like that. But sadly, the last couple of years, we don't see a big win with this intra-Europe transfers. It's even worse because they make you do the whole import process almost all over again. And in a way, I wonder, and I think that's a very valid comment made by Giulia at the beginning of this forum. Where are we on performance-based regulation and how does that work? because what the regulators are doing today, the national authorities, they question everything that their friends from across the border have done within the same EASA environment. So that's not helping us at all. We do deal a lot with local flavor as well, and the way things need to look, and that goes into really stupid details. The way a template is done, for instance, is it printed in landscape or portrait? It goes that far, really. It's not a joke, and that is just not helping us. And I think that undermines the whole idea of having an EASA concept across Europe.
So EASA is all well and good, but if the philosophy isn't taken down to the national authorities, then it doesn't make that much difference for the authorities. How do you keep things professional? I mean, you must be in some frustrating situations with national regulators. Do you have any anger management tips for the people in the audience today?
Paul, it sounds like you know me very well. In regards to anger management, I experienced once a discussion with a gentleman we had a very detailed, picky discussion on how a maintenance program should look like, and it really was up to or down to the level of the font size and whether the gentleman of the authority wanted sidebars to see the changes or red ink. And I told him that as an organization that is across all Europe, we really like to see some harmonization there. And I suggested, you know what, I have here the telephone number of your colleague in the other country, and actually in several other countries. Why can't we organize a little conference call and discuss this so we can harmonize that part? And he became very anxious and nervous about this, and he said, "Oh no, we cannot do that. We have harmonization and standardization meetings with EASA." Now I know from first-hand experience, and we work a lot together with our friends from Gamma on the European level on that these standardization meetings that EASA organize, it's the regulator talking to themselves, and as long as they don't really hear from us what the issues are, and that is really why we need to be part of this, and why everyone should be part of this and helping you guys out and helping the industry out.
So we need a forum, and we need to get people involved. And absolutely. I think on that point, I'm going to bring in Kyle Martin from Gamma. I want to look at this in terms of the future, in terms of what we can do to make things more positive. How can we move beyond, as an industry, this fragmented approach, Kyle?
I think the main point, I think David mentioned and Arjen as well, is it's working together with a collective voice. If one company complains about one inspector in one member state, it's not going to make massive progress. Actually, it could make your life worse, because you might have to deal with that same inspector in your next aircraft or your next approval. So we need to work together and quantify what the real problems are, because David mentioned standardization. We had it in the previous panel as well. There is a standardization process, but it's not what we all think it is. It's essentially EASA checking that each member state is ensuring the safe implementation of the rules in all the 32 member states for now, soon to be 31. Let's not mention the UK again. Basically making sure that everyone's up to the same minimum standard, and safety is the #1 priority for that. So making sure all member states are safely implementing those rules. The other impacts of standardization, like the competitive differentials between member states and the economic impact that US companies are facing every day, I would say are second or third order in terms of priority. They're not checking or criticizing or raising findings because a member state or an inspector is gold plating the regulations. So the only thing we can do to actually change things is to work together and quantify what those economic impacts are. And as I said, collective action. That's why we as Gamma, we're happy to partner with EBAA on this, because we need to work together to have a strong, coherent voice for business aviation maintenance, which has not existed anywhere in the past in Europe, to really come together and share experiences, like Arjen said, and try and identify the common themes. It's been really enlightening in the 3 years we've been running the Gamma European Business Aviation Maintenance Working Group, chaired by David. We have had enlightening experiences where, one company explains an issue, another company across the room says, well, I've got the same issue in another member state, then I found a solution by adding this to my maintenance exposition, and sharing experiences like that can do things. Because let's face it, if we go down the route of trying to revise Part 145 or Part M, that's a 5 to 7 year project, and it's not going to help any of your day-to-day work. It's really about trying to increase communication, understanding between authorities and with the EASA to get some clarity on the rules. I actually had the interesting experience just over a year ago presenting to EASA's first ever maintenance standardization workshop, where I stood up as the only industry representative in front of 30 NEAs trying to tell them all the things they were doing wrong for business aviation maintenance. I can tell you, I wasn't a very popular guy in the room, but it was a good start to the discussion, and following from that, we've had some good discussions with different NEAs trying to resolve misunderstandings, miscommunications. But I think only having that dialogue is the only way to go, because we need to get the NEAs in the room with the EASA and try and understand rules. Raising findings or writing angry letters to the DGs of national authorities is a last resort, and it's not going to get us a quick win. Neither is drafting brand new regulations. It's really improving guidance and improving understanding and communication.
And do you think that the regulators are willing to listen when we're coming to them with arguments about the economic impact? Or will their approach generally be, listen, we're focusing on safety, you need to focus on safety too. Whether you can run a profitable company or not is not really up to us.
It's a hard argument. As always, safety is out there by far and away their number one priority, and they will use safety. If a particular inspector says that you need to paint that widget green because he thinks it's safer if it's painted green, you're going to have a hard problem explaining that it doesn't need to be painted green. But the economic impact can have more leverage if you play the level playing field argument and say, well, if you keep making us paint that widget green, well, maybe it's better if we go and do our maintenance in another member state where they let me paint it whatever damn color I like, pardon my language, because you really need to make that argument today. But regulators, as much as any of us, need to realize that we're all operating in a global, highly competitive marketplace. And if people keep making it harder to do business in one area for one regime, business will eventually move elsewhere. So I think we need to really strengthen those economic arguments, and that's why having multiple companies saying, well, look, this is costing 100 companies 100,000 euros per aircraft per year, then we have a much stronger argument to make than just one company saying it's affecting their one aircraft.
Thanks, Kyle. And I think when we're looking at quick wins, I think one important area is in maintenance tracking software and some of the duplication of effort that comes from regulators not being willing to accept certain things there. I'd like to bring Awana in on this. I know that this is a big focus for you. Tell me a bit about the challenges in terms of maintenance software, what needs to be presented to the regulator, and what path do you see through this so that we can make things more streamlined for operators?
Hi, everyone. Well, each common needs obviously tracking system to be able to exist. Obviously, different computerized maintenance tracking systems are being used, and all depending on the nature of operation, fleet composition, fleet size, and obviously budgets. However, today, and especially in business aviation, majority of aircraft is on CAMP, and therefore we can take them as benchmark. Recently, we have seen evolution ongoing across of different platforms, new tools being developed with different functionalities, often just to meet the regulatory requirements. Unfortunately, also often discussion point with the authorities that we have are ending up in on management of the ADs and AMPs. If I concentrate for a second on CAMP, for example, has focused on the development of CAMO tools such as AD portal and AMPs managers, and that these tools provide control and the quality management system to ensure that data is being fully controlled by the CAMO. ADs and AMPs are honestly basic of daily continuing airworthiness activities next to the maintenance planning and defect management. But to manage them, it's always very complex and time consuming when we are using different platforms. CAMO needs to allocate a lot of resources to manage all different AMPs and its revisions, and the same counts for the ADs and SBs. Different organizations have a different approach. However, what we've seen is quite often a lot of manual work is involved. different Excel files, spreadsheets, or Word documents being used, at the end leading to errors and resulting in different audit findings. Therefore,
sorry to interrupt you, but is this just a question of trying to get the regulators to accept the AMPs that are within the CAMO software, rather than having to do a separate AMP on paper, duplicating work and for no real reason? Is that what it comes down to?
Yes, absolutely. It's just because there's quite some authorities are not really willing to accept and approve being, well, CAMO using the CAMP system as much as we want. The question has been so far always coming down to the fact that they consider CAMP tool which is not giving the sufficient control to the CAMO. And the key element in our existence in the airworthiness continuing activities is just to demonstrate that we are in charge and we have the final control on everything. So therefore we really need the tool in place which provides that. And we are now having a lot of discussions, and we've seen across different organizations that some national authorities are more open to just shift from the paper-based processes to online, which for us, obviously, it's a big win, because we can be more efficient, we can just reduce the efforts, we can just reduce the failure rate and everything, because we limit jumping from different platforms in order to just get to the final end, which is the AMP or the assessment of AD. So there is obviously a need to just have discussions and try to show or try to explain and make everybody understand that we as CAMO, we really need the tracking system, and CAMP is the best example. CAMP actually understood the need. They've been putting a lot of time and efforts recently to just have the feedback and the different discussions with the different operators across the globe. And based on that, many workshops have been conducted and many working sessions. And as outcome, they came up recently with the AMP management tool, which we are very happy about, because if we look at just how the process is right now, when we have to work in Excel, in Word, then combine all the files, making PDF and everything, it is really asking for problems, because there isn't a big margin for failure. Once, if we are able to have everything accommodated in one platform, in one software, we will be more efficient, and obviously we will just be able to provide product which is much better, which at the end will lead to efficiency and save operation, because our operation is based on the AMPs.
I mean, it sounds good, it sounds optimistic, it sounds like if we keep working on this, that eventually more people will start to listen. So thanks for that. I'd like to move on now, again, looking at things in a more positive way. We need to be focused on solutions and not have this as a sort of open discussion where we all just share our problems and nothing really goes anywhere. David van den Langenberg, there's also the question of the EASA AOC. And maybe this could address some of the lack of standardization and so on. I know that you've been working on a pilot project connected with this. Could you tell me a bit about this?
Well, that's an interesting project. We are at the moment running in the organization a couple of years ago, and again I was privileged to experience the birth of this new basic regulations and the article that would allow a single EASA license for companies that are in several nations in the EASA environment, or one company that is operating and has operations in several nations. It's been a long exercise to get where we need to be, but I'm happy to share with you that we're very close to the finish of obtaining our single EASA AOC license next month. If you would ask me why are we spending so much effort and energy in doing this, because if I go into the details, it has been an interesting challenge, especially discussing with the national authorities. But the answer is very logical and simple. If you can't, as an operator, if you can't bring Moses, and what I mean is the national authority, to the mountain, then you'll have to bring the mountain to Moses, you know. So our idea was to have the privilege and to be able to work directly with the EASA would take away a lot, not all, I must say, but a lot of the chattered situation we see across Europe today. We will have one management system, one safety management system, one set of books, both on the operations and on the camo side. EASA will still be happily working with the national authorities, also in our regard, but instead of having to post a question on the EASA website for some consultation, I can pick up the phone and talk to my flight ops or camo inspector in Cologne directly, and we'll have automatically a much better and much faster integrated standardization, because that's what it's all about in our company.
But of course, sorry to interrupt, but of course this doesn't mean that you're going to be able to avoid those nice interactions that you have with national authorities. I mean, the national authorities will still be overseeing this in some sense, is that right? So how do you see that working out?
Indeed, and we should not forget that EASA is not part of the Chicago Convention. They are not a country, so they cannot issue a registry. They don't have a registry. You cannot register an aircraft EASA. You can only do it with a country. So on that aspect, and all the work you need to do to register an aircraft, that authority will remain with the national authorities, which is in a way okay. But now, for us, the interesting part is that what the national authorities are often very nervous about when they have an EASA audit, it's with the EASA that we are working in regards to the processes. So the process, how I will do my maintenance programs and how all the documents and templates will look like, whether I will be paperless, yes or no, that will all be approved by EASA, and I only need the national authority to make sure that I'm meeting those requirements that is approved by EASA, and to obtain my registration certificate.
Okay, very good. Do you know anything about dry leasing arrangements? We've got a question from Dave Edwards in the comments. At what point does it make sense for operators to hand back their AOCs and simply move to dry leasing arrangements?
Not really my cup of tea, Paul. I think that's more for our legal team.
We can maybe get Joel back in on that, or Giulia and Fred back in that later on. Sorry that we don't have an answer there for you yet, Dave, but thanks for sending in the question. Nonetheless, I'd like to just move back to Arjen. Arjen, why do you need more people to get involved?
Well, yeah, it's also, of course, the points that Dave brought up. That's really spot on. You know, there are really harmonization issues, and like also Iwona described in a more technical way. And also, like Kyle just mentioned, that by having one focal point, and what I see over the last 3 years with Gamma and having EBAA working together on this joint maintenance group, is that you have one voice, and you have, first of all, you have recognition on the side of EASA. So EASA already said, okay, all right, it's true. They're not arguing that different member states, inspectors of the different member states have different opinions. It's there, it's accepted. It's actually now more a matter of channelizing all the different topics that we have. And we have really a good list with topics inside the maintenance work group. And a lot of those things are also hooking together. So in other words, to do maintenance in the end, you need to have, first of all, good people. And actually, I'm really proud about all the technicians that working into the maintenance business are really superior technicians. You know, it's compared to the commercial aviation. You see that airlines, they decided to standardize their fleets. So then they're either Airbus operators or Bombardier operators, and they try to reduce the amount of make and models as far as possible. But in the business aviation industry, then we deal with a lot of different make and models, and you have those challenges. Now, first of all, the technicians are really good. I think, I know when I was a little kid, I took something apart and then brought it back together. I was left with 2 spare parts and it still worked. So I thought, well, hey, this is not going to happen in business aviation. Technicians are good. technology is moving along. You need to educate yourself, and it's actually a matter of, by standardization, that you take away the burden of you have to do it like you have to paint the blue wall, the wall, you have to paint it blue or green or red. Get away with this discussion, standardize, and that will really help and ease your day-to-day business. So
yeah, Arjen, and I think what's really important as well is that you actually have this list, because I think prioritization is important. I mean, there are thousands of problems that we're facing with respect to regulation, but highlighting the ones that are most important, I think, is really good. So I'd like to congratulate you all on the work that you're doing, urge more people to get involved. We're going to move on now to the next topic. So thank you, David, thank you, Oana, thank you, Kyle, and thank you, Arjen. There's somebody with their hand up for a long time, so I want to see, as we're introducing the next session, if we can just get Vincente. Maybe if you could put your hand up again, we'll try and get you on, Vincente. Sorry for leaving you waiting for so long. While we're trying to do that, we are going to move on from maintenance to ground handling. And I'm very happy to have two representatives of EBAA's Airport and Ground Handling Committee, the two chairs, in fact, Marc Pieters from RA Consulting and Joseph Azzaz from Aéroport Saint-Tropez. Will be bringing on another speaker in just a moment. Marc, Joseph, how are you doing?
We're doing good.
Good to hear, Marc. And Joseph,
good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, Joseph, you're calling in from Saint-Tropez. How are you doing, Joseph? Are you online? Okay, Joseph, maybe we'll just try and get you up in a moment. I know that you're dealing with a lot of flights at the same time while participating in this webinar. Marc, in that case, I'm going to start with you. Marc, are ground operations the weak link in business aviation safety?
I would say it's not a weak link. It's one of the most risky activity we have in aviation. If you look at the EASA safety report from 2019, you will find a chart. And in this chart, it's clear that ground handling is one of the most risky activity. It's not a weak link, but it's something we should take care of. Do you have the chart?
Absolutely. If we just move to the chart now, there's just one chart here that I think demonstrates that. Can you explain this to me, Marc?
Yeah. So, as you can see on this chart, you have a lot of things, and the most risky one is ground handling on the top right side of it. Why we have this ground handling as a high risk is because the industry in itself generated it. If you look at the ground handling, they are just considered as people who take luggage, do catering, and clean toilets and things like this. So usually they are considered as people that are not well paid. So it's always going to the cost of this activity. So as of today, many operators go for the lowest cost, and lowest cost will means poor training, will means, I will say, very low level of qualification and so on. If you pay with peanuts, you will get monkeys.
Okay.
The thing is, a lot of things generate, a lot of accident generated by the ground handling. If we look to the towing, for example, it represents more than 25% of the accident in the ground handling. If you look at that, training is essential. So again, if operators go for the lowest cost, I don't see how they can expect the highest safety and the highest quality in terms of services.
Okay.
If you compare, you buy a Ferrari and you go to the cheapest garage to the corner, what do you expect?
I mean, 100%. I think one other part of this that's going to be addressed soon is with respect to regulation. There is a regulation in the pipeline now, and I think we should discuss that as well. To kind of continue that discussion, I'd like to introduce another speaker, and we know that it's tough times in the industry now, so we wanted to do something to lift everyone's spirits. So we have now one of the most optimistic people in the industry. I think his enthusiasm is like a benign but highly contagious virus which infects everybody that he comes in contact with. That's Terry Yeomans. Terry, how are you doing?
I've never been called optimistic before, so thank
really?
you for that, Paul.
Okay. Terry, same question for you. Are ground operations the weak link in business aviation safety?
Well, it depends which sort of side of the fence you're looking at. So it has the potential to be like that. But we can do something about it, and it's in our hands to make sure that we can do the most we can to prevent ground damage happening. And we're trying to do that as a sector. We've been trying to do that for a number of years now. We're taking the lead in it. We have been taking the lead in it since 2014, thanks to EBAA's push and promotion to try and get through a ground handling standard for our sector at the IBAC governing board. So, you know, I've been involved with IBAC for a long time as a UK representative, and you know, I was one of the few people that stood up and said trying to bring in a standard for ground handling is pointless, because people are going to chase the cheapest fuel or the cheapest prices. But with this regulation, and we knew the regulation was coming because of the advocacy work we're doing, EBAA pushed for this standard, and we really thank you for doing that, because it's given us an eye-opener and the opportunity now to be right in at the start of the regulation development and the promotion of regulation, or the promotion of standards within the industry.
We're the proactive ones now. We're ahead of the regulation.
We've been way ahead of the regulation, as we did with EBAA. We were ahead of the regulation, and that's what we at IBAC have tried to do over the years. We've been very backwards in coming forwards at IBAC over the years. I think there's been an interpretation of everything we come up with is here to make money. I can assure you we don't make money. We have our regular governing board and planning and operations committee meetings, and we don't make money out of these. They are here to help industry, these programs, and they are driving the regulations and how organizations and regulators see our sector.
Absolutely. I see Athar has his hand up. Athar, do you want to come in on this discussion, and maybe while we're just getting you on? Athar, do you have something to say?
No, I'm sorry. It wasn't intentional.
Okay,
I'll come in if you want me to, but I don't have anything specifically. Sorry about that.
No problem. No, it's all good. So for handlers, Terry, that haven't, and Marc, for handlers that haven't started preparing for this regulation, where should they start?
Marc, you've done it. Off you go.
Go for it, Marc.
Why did you do it?
Why we did it? Because we wanted to improve first safety and give a better, I would say, service to our customers. In the company I was before, I inherited of the project at I would say EMEA and APAC region for 18 FBOs, and we had to create not only the SMS, but it was a quality and safety management system we put in place. The EBAA standard is perfect for the SMS side. Then we added this into we added to it the quality. So we built a strong and unique system in the business aviation world, where we have been able, based on the EBAA standard, to have a common manual for people who are completely different. So you have to work with a multicultural environment, with different language, with different use, with different local regulation, and all this kind of jazz. And it was something, I would say, it was a big challenge, but finally we made it. So then it should be the organization willing. It should come from the top management to build such a system. It's not something that you get from the shelf. It has to be built from scratch, and all the actors should be really involved in it. And if the top management is not involved, if there is not a willing, it's not going to work.
Well,
Then
Marc,
all
sorry,
this.
sorry to interrupt, Marc. Marc, I want to know about the regulation. What should people do to prepare for the regulation? Is it that they should just go through the EBAA process?
I would say the EBAA process is the perfect basis to build a system.
Okay. Okay. Now,
I will recommend to go for the EBAA process. Clearly,
now,
this is what we did, because all the requirements from the regulation are already in the EBAA standard.
Now that's an important point, because I remember with NCC, there was EBAA, but then there was a gap analysis between EBAA and NCC. So you would do EBAA, but then there was a bunch of other stuff that you need to do as well. Terry, is it going to be the same way with EBAA and the ground handling regulation? Or will the regulators just accept EBAA?
So it was really interesting listening to the earlier discussion about how the regulation process works. What's been really interesting sitting in at the ICAO level, you know, we've been involved with the ICAO ground handling task force since 2014. The same year EASA set up a task force as well with regards to ground handling. It is correct, as was said earlier, that EASA are not ICAO members, but it's very, very interesting sitting in an ICAO safety meeting where EASA say, we don't care what you're doing it, we're doing it this way. Yeah. So here we have a state or a regulator that covers 32 states at the moment across Europe. Each one of those individual member states is an ICAO member that has their own voice at ICAO, effectively being usurped by a regional safety authority saying, we don't care what ICAO says, we're doing it our way. So that's been very, very interesting. So what we're trying to do, and this is why having the contact with EBAA and IBAC as a very, very close contact within this organization.
We're like facilitating the link between the two.
Exactly, and that's what we're trying to do. And from an individual state organization, so wherever you're based, whether it be Italy, Germany, France, Switzerland, Andorra, wherever you may be, get those concerns through to EBAA. They can then feed them to us at IBAC, and we can make sure that your voice is heard. This is how we operate at an international level. So yes, we're driving and working with the regulators, and our biggest issue is the airlines. The airlines stand up on AHGO and they stand up at EASA and say, we represent aviation. We are the minority standing up at the same meeting saying, hang on a second, you may represent your 120 plus members, airlines, but you don't represent aviation. The rest of it, the float plane operators in Canada, the small Cessna 125 operator, those operators need a spokesperson, whether that be regionally, nationally, or internationally. And we can help do that. And that's what we're trying to do with these standards. Everything we do, we're trying to make sure that the regulations are proportionate to our sector.
Absolutely. I don't know if it's a good thing for aviation overall, but we are, of course, less of a minority than we were last year. I'm going to try and bring Joseph in as well. Joseph, if you're there, I want to get your input on the impact that this new regulation is going to have on operators. Can you come in on that? I think we're still struggling with Zoom on that one. So, Marc, what do you think? What's the impact going to be on operators?
It could be only a positive impact, because this regulation will push the ground service providers to have an SMS in place and a quality system in place. As of today, the only thing we can find, I will say in business aviation, talking about SMS and a bit of quality, is the EBAA standard. Again, operators have to audit their suppliers, and they have to make sure that they comply with their safety management system. Operator, they have to have the SMS in place, but they should make sure that their supplier complies also with it. As of today, there is no regulation for ground handling, and they are one of the suppliers. So we will, as ground handlers, have a system in place, and it will facilitate, I will say, also the job. It will be a plus for the operators. I don't know how many operators in the room request from their FBO to have the EBAA standard, but it's clearly, I would say, a reference. And I think this reference maybe in the regulation will be named as a reference in the regulation, but clearly this regulation, I will say, will bring something positive for the operators.
Yeah.
In terms of safety, quality of service.
Yeah, it sounds. I mean, it sounds like a very positive development. One very nice question here from Colin at the Isle of Man. I'm going to throw this at you, Terry. How do you discriminate the entry level into ground handling regulation? Would a flying club at an unlicensed aerodrome be regulated? If not, how is the line drawn?
I think that's going to come down to the regulators and how they want to view it. Certainly in Europe, the approach seems to be on the 2 million plus passengers a year aerodromes. From our point of view is we have built a standard that is scalable. It's fully scalable. Currently, of the 240 plus organizations that have done stage 1 for the standard, the smallest organization is a 2-person operation in Canada. So we know that it's scalable. That operation chose to do it because their parent company wanted them to do it to support their own aircraft operations. So we know that it can be scalable. It's there, it's available to the regulatory authorities if they choose to have it and choose to identify it as a requirement. But we can't enforce that. It's as simple as that. You know, we're not regulators. We're just there to provide a solution for people that they can work to.
Joseph, if you're there, you just need to shout and we'll get you on. There's still that sort of muting issue. You know, Terry, the question is about the scope of the actual regulation. Does a very small GA handler have to start worrying about this regulation?
Currently, no, because the only organization or the only authorities that are looking at it is EASA. And they are looking at this 2 million passenger a year, possibly as a threshold. They are talking about all ground handling service providers, and that list of ground handling service providers is not just what you would class as an FBO. It does include catering suppliers, load control companies, that sort of thing. And it may include trip support companies. And that's one of the ones that we're trying to get a great deal of clarification on as to whether they should be in or outside of the scope. I have my own personal opinions on that, but, you know, we are working again with the regulatory authorities to see what is best. All I can say is the standard that we have can be scaled down to the small organizations. How the regulators want to enforce that, it's entirely up to them. We certainly would not be pushing for that at small GA airfields.
Okay, but the message is as well, if they need it, it's there.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. I'm going to move on now from the regulation to another topic, which is the ground handling directive. We've had a lot of conversations about this in the past year. The message that I've gotten from my colleagues is that this is not up for revision at European Commission level, but maybe there are some opportunities in the way that it is being implemented. But my first question is, does this directive provide a framework for fair and open competition within ground handling? Marc, what do you think?
I would say it's not fair because there is no, I would say, distinction between business aviation and airline commercial aviation. So there, they put everybody in the same package. And again, as it was explained by Terry just before, we don't do the same business as the big airlines. It's completely different. So for me, it's not fair. They should distinguish. They should clearly distinguish the business we do and what the big airlines are doing.
It certainly seems bizarre to me that some companies will be working as agents, will have the equipment, will know how to operate the equipment, but actually won't be allowed to operate it because they don't have a license. Terry, can you think of any examples of this where just the application doesn't make sense?
Yeah, there's one that we're very aware of where, you know, the FBO, they own the hangar, they own all the equipment, but they're actually not able to provide the service beyond the boundary of their hangar door. And that is just absolutely ridiculous that an organization can spend that sort of money and investment in facilities, but not be able to provide that service actually on the ramp to move the aircraft. They're physically driving the equipment to the door of their hangar, handing the equipment over to the airlines staff so that they can then provide the services on behalf of the FBO. That is not an efficient way of doing business, and why would you ever want to put money into investing in an airport infrastructure if you're not able to provide that service yourself? So that's something that we're really pushing. That should not be allowed to happen.
I mean, it sounds like a great topic for an industry association to take on, and surely this should be our role. Do you see any potential for us to get some changes at local level so that some of our members have an opportunity to actually provide the services that they're very well equipped to provide?
Yeah, I think, again, this is down to interpretation as well. You know, we're moving towards performance-based standards, and I think that the interpretation at a local level is being taken literally in some cases. And I think that we need to be educating as a sector airports and nations as to what business aviation is and what our needs are. I keep saying at AHGO, one size does not fit all. We need to be having that same discussion at national and regional levels. One size solutions do not fit all, and they never will.
I mean, that's our bread and butter. That's what we're focusing on every single day. There's another aspect to this, which is that there are no safety or quality requirements within the actual directive. So on the one hand, we're asking for more liberalization, but on the other hand, should we also be asking for it to be tightened up a bit so that if it was liberalized, it wouldn't just be a free-for-all, that there would be some quality requirements in there?
I would hope it would go beyond quality. I hope it would take safety as a core value rather than just quality, because we all know you can provide a very high quality service unsafe, and vice versa. So yeah, certainly I think there is definitely a need there for support for that sort of a process, that we need to be able to show that we can manage our safety, we can provide quality services and compete on an equal playing field with the airline handling agents for our sector of the business at that particular airfield.
Fantastic. 100%.
And just one thing to point out, the AHGO work, Paul, they are actually looking at the moment, tying this in with the SARPs on aerodromes, PANS aerodrome SARPs. So it is likely that one of the tags there from an international point of view is that the aerodromes will require some form of management system in order to link the licensing application to it. And that could be a good move.
Yeah. So I think we have 5 minutes left. I want to bring up our final poll, if we still have one, if we could get that up there. Marc, are you very keen to explain to us what the biggest challenge faced by business aviation today? That's what I want to know. What is the biggest challenge faced by business aviation today? Is it improving the industry record on the environment, developing a sustainable operator business model, attracting and keeping talent, or achieving a proportionate regulatory framework? Marc, what do you think?
I think, from my point of view, developing a sustainable operation business model is going to be something that will say a challenge. It's something that EASA will focus, and everybody is focusing on sustainability today. So I think this is the challenge, and this is what was brought also by Giulia at the beginning. I think this is one of the most important things we will have to face in the future.
Terry, what do you think?
Yeah, same with me. I think today, currently, if you'd have asked me that in February, the answer would have been different, I guess. But today, that second question there, developing a sustainable operator business model, we're facing very, very difficult times. Everybody's facing difficult times, and just keeping in business is going to be what people are going to have to focus on.
In an environment where the standards are increasing, the safety is increasing, the regulation is increasing, it requires quite a bit of innovation. I think with this poll, and we see that, in fact, most people agree with Marc and Terry, developing a sustainable operator business model, 62% are going for that answer, 12% on improving the industry record on the environment. That's a bit surprising for me. 6% attracting and keeping talent, and 21% achieving a proportionate regulatory framework. That concludes our discussion today. I would like to thank everybody who got involved. I would like to apologize to the people that I wasn't able to get into the discussion. The questions in the question and answer function were challenging. The discussion can continue on LinkedIn, of course. Next week, we are rethinking technology and rethinking business aviation insurance. We're here at the same time, same place again. I see that just one more question, maybe I'll throw at you, Terry. FBOs, which are EBAA accredited, still receive a large number of operator audits. Is there a plan to promote audit pooling in order to provide efficiencies? You have 1 minute to answer that question, Terry.
Well, again, that's down to the operators. That's the whole idea behind the standards. What I would like to understand, and I get some of it, is why the operators feel that they need to do a secondary audit of an organisation that already has had a safety audit, an independent safety audit. I get it, because in many cases, the person who's doing that audit, that's their job. But the idea is to give that person, that organisation, the comfort that the EBAA registration is a indication of the safety management activities of that organisation. If it's a quality audit, completely different. But from a safety management aspect, there should be no reason to double audit an organisation that is already EBAA certified.
Okay, got it, Terry. Thanks very much. So they were the final words on that. I would like to thank Frederique for all of the communications. I would like to thank Justine again for ensuring a flawless technical delivery of this webinar. Thank you to Paolo as well for coordinating everything at AMAC level. That's volunteer work from Paolo, and also all of the AMAC chairs and AMAC members. This is what an industry association is all about. I'm going to leave it there for now. Thank you everybody for participating. Have a great day, and talk to you again next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.